Okay, think about this for a second. You're a teenager, arrested, blindfolded, days of interrogation, but you have absolutely no idea what they actually want from you. And all the while, beatings with electric cables.
Yeah.
That experience, Kivan Shabazi's experience in Iran, it's it's not just a hook. It really sets the stage for the high stakes we're looking at today.
It absolutely does. It grabs you immediately, and it really underscores why this deep dive is, well, so important. Our listeners, they're looking for clarity, right? On political Islam, its rise, what it could mean, especially for the West.
Exactly.
And Shahbazi, cultural psychologist, author, his book, The Price of Freedom, his own story, he offers that crucial perspective. He's quite well known in the Netherlands, writes regularly for The Telegraph.
Right, a familiar voice for many there. So our main source today is this interview with him. It's on the Telegraph's YouTube channel. He covers his personal history, the upheaval in Iran that led to political Islam taking over, and his worries, his real concerns about similar things maybe happening in Europe now.
And our goal here, our mission, is pretty straightforward. Pull out the key insights from Shahbazi's story, his observations. We want to give people a solid grasp of how political Islam developed, its potential impact on places like the Netherlands, and, by extension, other Western democracies.
Get the knowledge, get it quickly but thoroughly, without getting bogged down.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Deliver the understanding without the overload.
Okay, so let's start with Shirbazi's background. Where did he come from? He grew up in Karaj, relatively wealthy family.
Yeah, that's right. His father was in business, agricultural, road machinery, quite substantial. His mother was an education inspector. So on the surface, yeah, a comfortable life early on.
But even then, it seems like things were simmering. He mentions his first book, The American of Kaj.
Right, The American Vankaj. The title itself, it comes directly from that horrific experience in prison, being accused, totally falsely, of being a spy for the U.S. for Israel. That paranoia was already there, you see.
Chilling, a sign of things to come. And then there's that moment he describes, the family trip to Europe in '78. He was only 14.
Yeah, sees a newspaper photo on the Champs-Élysées. Iranian Revolution unfolding, soldiers shooting demonstrators, bodies. His mother tried to hide it from him, but that image,
Gets stuck with him.
definitely. And then they go back to Tehran, and the contrast is just jarring. Military everywhere, soldiers, armed vehicles. The Shah was out, a military regime declared, complete transformation.
He does talk about a brief period, though, like a spring of freedom in 1979.
Yeah, a short window where banned stuff books, newspapers suddenly became available. For him as a teen, it was like this sudden flood of forbidden ideas.
But it's important, as he points out, that the Shah's regime wasn't exactly a bastion of freedom either, right? It was also a dictatorship.
That's a critical point. People sometimes forget that. It was a different kind of dictatorship, but oppressive nonetheless. So this little spring was very short-lived.
And then the power shift really happened.
Absolutely. June 1981 seems to be the key moment. Liberal figures pushed out of the cabinet, Islamists under Khomeini consolidating full control. That's when the first president, Ben Sadr, had to flee to France.
Okay, and this is where it gets really fascinating, I think. Shahbazi talks about this early collaboration between left-wing groups and the revolutionary Islamists. Seems counterintuitive now.
It does, but there's a whole historical context. You had Iranian left-wing students, many studying abroad, ironically, often thanks to the Shah's policies getting influenced by Western thinkers.
Like Michel Foucault.
Yeah, Foucault was mentioned. There was this idea floating around, this concept of a sort of socialist Islam, a third way against both the Soviets and the West, including the Shah. A unique path, they thought.
Hard to imagine now. And Shahbazi also mentions the U.S. backing the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Right, as an anti-Soviet move, which, inadvertently boosted forces that later became the Taliban.
Yeah.
So it was a complex mix of global politics, intellectual trends, internal Iranian dynamics.
All feeding into the rise of Islamism.
Exactly. And Shahbazi's point, the one that really worries him now, is that he sees echoes of that same dynamic, that left-wing collaboration, or maybe naivety, regarding Islamists playing out today in the West.
Which brings us to the actual establishment of the Islamic Republic. Those initial freedoms, gone.
Snuffed out, quickly and brutally, as the Islamic dictatorship cemented its power. And he flags 1979 as just this massive year globally for political Islam. Not just Iran, but the Kaaba occupation in Mecca, the Taliban emerging. It all seemed to happen then.
He even tells that story about Egypt's Nasser years before, mocking the hijab to a laughing crowd. Shows how much things changed, how secular much of the Middle East was.
Absolutely. You had Ba'athism,
Yeah.
Ataturk's reforms in Turkey. Secular influences were strong. The current situation isn't some ancient, unbroken tradition. It was a shift.
And that's Shahbazi's core warning, isn't it? That the way Islamism took hold there, that pattern, he sees it potentially unfolding here. In Europe, maybe the U.S.
That's his deep concern, that the West might be on the same path, just maybe lagging behind a bit.
It's a sobering thought, and it connects directly to his own just horrific personal experience, arrested at 17.
Yeah, thrown into prison, 39 men crammed together.
Yeah.
Awful conditions. And the daily beatings, the torture.
Yeah. He mentions being interrogated by Raisi, the guy who later became president and died recently.
Yes, Raisi himself. It just highlights the continuity of the regime, the same figures involved over decades.
And the psychological torture. Not knowing what they wanted, just beatings with those black electric cables, the story about the scar on his knee.
Bullet wound,
Okay.
yeah. They just wouldn't believe his explanation. A simple fall shows the paranoia, the irrationality.
And then execution night, every Thursday, lined up, shots fired, not knowing if it's your turn.
Unimaginable terror. And people were executed. Many people. The constant fear. It's hard to fathom the psychological scars.
His release, it only happened because his parents could bribe officials.
Which tells you a lot about the corruption, doesn't it? But it allowed him to get to a hospital, and then a doctor helped him escape the country. Luck, connections, money, factors that decided life or death.
But so many others weren't lucky. He talks about the 1988 mass executions.
Horrific. Khomeini's death commission, specifically set up to purge political prisoners. And Raisi, again, was a key member, actively involved.
Asking superficial religious questions.
Right. And if your answer wasn't deemed devout enough, that was it. Sent to your death. Just like that.
The details are sickening. Hanged from heating pipes, sometimes having to put the noose on themselves, like his friend Zara.
And then the bodies bulldozed into mass graves at night. Just erased.
He estimates 121 mass graves, 5,000 known victims just from September 88, and families still can't even visit these sites, like the one near Tehran.
And yet, Shahbazi points out, you have some Western journalists in Tehran, like Thomas Erdbrink he mentioned, writing about, the underfloor heating in his villa while apparently ignoring a known mass grave nearby. It raises questions about what gets reported, what gets ignored.
Which leads straight into his critique of some Western experts on the Middle East, especially those he sees as having a left-wing bias.
He feels they present too rosy a picture of regimes like Iran. He gives the example of Payman Jafari, the international socialist guy.
Waving his Iranian passport.
Allegedly, yeah, at a left event, implying Shahbazi felt a primary loyalty to Iran while being presented in Western media as this neutral expert. Shahbazi finds that fundamentally misleading.
And Shahbazi himself faced consequences for saying these things at the Volkskrant newspaper.
Yeah, accused of smear and insult by the editor-in-chief then, Philip de Winter. Even though Shahbazi says he gave them two versions of his column with and without names, and they chose the one with names.
He felt it was suppression.
He contrasted it with other columnists he felt were making personal attacks, or even supporting groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, seemingly without issue. For him, it wasn't about insults, it was about factual criticism of Islamism being shut down.
Which is why he left Volkskrant for The Telegraph.
Right. And interestingly, he said leaving actually broadened his horizons, exposed him to more viewpoints, made him value that openness even more.
And he really pushes back on the idea that criticizing political Islam is automatically right-wing.
He argues it should be part of a progressive left-wing position. He thinks the Western left has been sidetracked by what he calls wokeism, leading to a kind of tribalism that can overlook certain kinds of oppression.
He talks about dissidents from the Middle East, leftists fleeing Islamic regimes, coming west, expecting secularism, freedom of thought.
And then getting slammed as far-right or Islamophobic if they criticize Islamism. He really dislikes that term, Islamophobia. He says, look, fear of an ideology with a history of violence can be perfectly rational. He even uses his own mother's lifelong fear of Allah as an example.
So this idea of an alliance between parts of the left and Islamism, he sees it as dangerous.
Extremely dangerous. And self-defeating for the left. His analogy is stark. Based on Iran, political Islam, once in power, would target leftists first. They're an ideological threat.
He says many Iranian leftists who backed the revolution now regret it deeply.
They saw what happened. Maybe that initial shared anti-Western, anti-capitalist stance, or the illusion of Islam caring for the poor created a false bond.
His timing for publishing his book before Liberation Day in the Netherlands was intentional.
Very much so. To underscore the value of free expression, the need to critique any totalitarian ideology.
And he connects this directly to the situation of Jews in the Netherlands now.
Yeah, he's deeply troubled by it. Rising anti-Semitism, security at Holocaust museums, fear in the Amsterdam Jewish community. He sees it all as part of a broader decay of freedoms, of tolerance.
And he feels the leadership isn't stepping up.
He expresses disappointment. He mentions figures like Wilders or Baudet addressing it, but notes they're right-wing, not aligned with his own socioeconomic views. It highlights a political vacuum for him.
It sounds like he's quite disillusioned with how the Netherlands has changed since he arrived.
Profoundly. He remembers that initial feeling of freedom in Amsterdam, almost euphoria, and contrasts it with what he sees now, the increasing visibility of mosques, headscarves.
He mentioned the numbers, didn't he? From almost 0 mosques in the 50s to 450 now.
Yes. And he worries about Islamic schools, the pressure on young girls to wear headscarves, internalizing shame about their bodies, he believes.
He also points out what he sees as hypocrisy. Left-wing feminists protesting U.S. abortion laws.
While staying silent, he argues, on female genital mutilation happening in their own city, Amsterdam.
Right.
Estimated 20,000 cases.
And the Iranian women's rights activists who visited The Hague, one blinded by the regime.
Largely ignored, he says, by media, by left politicians. He speculates it might be fear of upsetting their Palestinian-supporting electorate. A very harsh critique.
And the consequence of speaking out, being labeled far-right, xenophobic.
Exactly. It silences people, he argues, creates self-censorship. He sees the same tactics online. Any criticism met with immediate accusations of racism, amplified, he feels, by some media figures. It reminds him of Iran.
So how do you break through that? How do you get back to rational discussion?
His core point is, criticizing Islam, the ideology, isn't the same as attacking Muslims, the people.
Well, the winter coat analogy.
Right. Religion as an idea, like a coat. You should be able to look at it, talk about it, critique it without it being a personal attack. If people feel personally attacked by criticism of their ideas, well, that's on them, he suggests.
He wants people to read the Quran critically.
Yes, not just accept it as sacred, untouchable. Because unquestioning faith, he warns, can lead to harmful actions.
What about the future? Does he see any counter movements?
He acknowledges some things emerging, but worries Europe lacks strong opposition figures compared to, say, Trump or Musk in the U.S. again, clarifying he doesn't share their politics. His main plea is for the left to wake up to the dangers he sees in political Islam.
He uses that example of Frans Timmermans with the girls in heavy headscarves.
As symbolizing, for him, the Dutch left's current direction, which he finds misguided. He mentions free left, as a potential space for different ideas, but it's not a party.
So the main intellectual critique is coming from the right, like JA21.
Currently, yes, he notes, which isn't his ideological home, creating this complex situation for someone like him.
And personally, what's his future?
He's in his 60s now. He says he doesn't want to be a refugee again. He's advised his kids to look for opportunities abroad, which says a lot.
It highlights that phenomenon, immigrants from Muslim countries often being the strongest critics of Islamism.
Because they've experienced it firsthand. But they get caught in the middle, often unfairly lumped in with right-wing narratives, while also facing real danger from their former countries.
The story about his mother being rearrested in Iran because of his activism here.
Terrifying. Shows the reach of the regime, the danger to families. He even tried to intervene via the Dutch ministry, and the Iranian security services basically tried to lure him back, friendly but menacing.
And the assassination threat is real. It's happened in the Netherlands before.
Absolutely. But Shahbazi insists he's not afraid. He wants them to know that. He feels a responsibility to speak for those silenced, those killed in Iran.
So how can people support the Iranian women protesting the hijab, the regime?
His answer is simple. Amplify their voices. Give them a platform. Reject the propaganda that tries to normalize the oppression in Iran.
And challenge the idea that the hijab is just a free choice.
Definitely. He sees it purely as a symbol of submission. He mentions Iranian men wearing hijabs in protest online, a powerful act of solidarity, and he criticizes media that downplay the reality.
What's his final take on Iran's future?
He doesn't see a return to the 70s as possible, but he firmly believes the current regime, corrupt and brutal, can't last forever. Change will come, he thinks. Though for him personally, the ties are broken, tragically severed. So wrapping up this deep dive into Kayvan Shahbazi's perspective, we've seen the history, the brutal reality in Iran through his eyes, and crucially, the parallels he draws to the West. That concern about misplaced alliances on the left, the erosion of values he perceives.
And the sheer courage of those resisting, it's a lot to take in.
It really is. But his personal story, combined with his analysis, it gives you, our listener, a perspective that cuts through the noise, goes beyond the headlines.
Which leaves us with a question, doesn't it? Given Shabazi's warnings, the history, what's our responsibility? As individuals, as societies in the West, how do we critically look at ideologies, protect freedoms before it's potentially too late?
Something to really think about. Maybe delve into his book, his articles, explore it further.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for taking this important and, yeah, challenging deep dive with us today.